So the non-Kubernetes experts, such as the development group, this is a perfect model for them because it gives them access to the information they need about how Kubernetes is operating and all the things that Helm provides without having to learn the API, without having to learn the command line, I should say. Hi, I'm Lee Atchison, and my guest today is Itiel Shwartz. Itiel is the co-founder and CTO of Komodor, a Kubernetes operation and management platform. Itiel, welcome, or should I say welcome back to Software Engineering Daily.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be here again, and again with you, Louis. I'm super happy.
Great, yeah, this is our first interview with video, so this is going to be a new experience for us, and hopefully our listeners enjoy this as well.
Yeah, listeners and now viewers, right?
And viewers, that's right. You got to change my language here now. It's not just listeners.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we've talked before on this podcast, but recently Commodore has made some changes in its direction. You've started focusing on a freemium and a DevFirst model, and we definitely want to talk about those things. But can you start by telling our listeners, who may not be familiar with you and what Commodore does, can you tell me a little bit about what Commodore is? Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to do like a quick recap, like what we do in life, like Commodore. Like we're a startup. We're still quite young, like 2.5-year-old. With that said, we are now 60 employees. We raised like a couple of, seed and A and B round, and we have dozens of different customers. So we're a young startup focused on helping people, and we're going to talk about what people to troubleshoot, to operate, to manage Kubernetes cluster much more easily. We started by focusing around the SRE and like the DevOps people, and we do provide them like really big value. But we are now doing like a small of like a focus change to help developers as well, and not only like operation people. And that is with the mindset that we see in the ecosystem of like the shift left movement, empowerment of developers. And we see this as a very, very big trend, both for our existing and potential customers. And this is why we're doing a small adjustments in the product to give real benefit for developers that find it hard to use, to troubleshoot, to manage Kubernetes. So this is a bit about both history and current, but yeah.
Yeah, so, let's get right into the DevFirst transformation you're talking about. So obviously the needs of an SRE and the needs of a dev are traditionally quite different. Now, DevOps is certainly merging them a lot more, but tell me a little bit about, what does it mean to move from SRE focused and operations only focused to be dev focused?
Yeah. So let me start by talking about the motivation. Like, why are we doing that, right? Like, why? And then I will talk about what really changed in terms of the product itself. So we're doing the change mainly because all of our customers ask us for that. Like, we met customers, like existing or potential customers, and we usually met with like the head of DevOps, head of SRE, heads of platform engineer, like different names, same people, and so on.
Yeah.
And the number one request that we kept on getting is, your product looks cool, it looks good, but can it also help my developers? And like the first question we ask them is, yeah, we can, but why? Like, why should we help the developers? Like, why do you guys care? Like, we're talking, why do you want us to help the developers? And the answer for that is a very, very, very large portion of the time being spent today in operation and in SRE kind of roles is to give support for developers, basically. And they're telling us that a huge chunk of their time is being spent on helping developers to understand what is happening inside their Kubernetes problems and to solve their problems. And it's frustrating. It's a very large part of their job. And basically what they are telling Commodore is, if you can just take this very large chunk of time out of my plate, I'll be like delightful. Like even if you don't really bring me any value, and we do bring them value as well, but even if you don't bring me any value, any direct value, if you can empower the developers, if you can make them self-sufficient, I will be like the happiest person ever. And we see this like time after time after time. And I can share with you like, yesterday we had a talk with one of, I will say, the biggest tech companies in the world. I will say like one of the top 5, top 10 maybe. And we talked with someone like very like, senior but hands-on, like head of all of the SRE, something. He has like a big title. And I asked him, like before, and they were connected by a mutual customer of us who is a good friend of his. So he already came, quite happy and quite delightful to hear about Commodore. But before talking about the product, I asked him, how does the troubleshooting process looks like in your organization? Like put Commodore aside, let's please help me to understand how does your day-to-day looks like. And then he said that, engineers or like SRE in his teams are spending like 30-40% of the time answering tickets and Slack messages from the developers. And he said like, when a developer don't know what to do, it's very easy for them. Like all they need to do is to escalate it for us. All they need to do is like to write in the Slack channel, hey, my service is down. It looks like an ops problem. Can someone please take a look? And for like the SRE,
it ends up not being an ops problem, and it ends up being something related to what they're responsible for.
And then he's like, and you know what? Yeah, like 30% of the time, all they really need to do is to read the log, right? That's it. They already have it in the application log. Just read it. Like, why is it so hard for them? And this is like, we had like a really interesting conversation, and now we're like starting a POC with them. And I think that what he said is like the essence of a lot of the struggle in Kubernetes adoption and in overall like ops to dev relationship. Like I think that we are talking as an industry a lot about like the shift left. And I think it happens, right? Like I think that in certain areas, like continuous delivery, it was something very ops back then. Tools like Argo and GitOps are making it very dev. Like even as a developer, I just don't think about it, right? Like I just commit to the master branch, and like a lot of magic happens and my code finds its way into production, which is quite amazing. But on the other hand, once my code is in production, there is no set of tools, processes that help me manage the chaos, which is like production systems. And to fill these gaps, basically, like this is what we do, this is what we focus, empowerment and like giving like a bringing the developers into a self-sufficient state. And we do that, and now we ask like, so, before I will explain how does it really translate into the product, I will stop for a second. What do you think, Lee? Like, does it make sense, the story?
Well, it definitely makes sense, and it also fits well into the move into, much more DevOps focused. Now, DevOps is a loaded word, but the idea that your developer owns more of operations, and the operations organization becomes more of the infrastructure and the supporting requirements to support a dev team to run their service within production. And that's becoming more of a standard, more of a norm. But what I'm wondering if this shift left that you're talking about with your product is related to that transformation as well too. Were your traditional customers more of the traditional dev and ops, and now you're shifting more into supporting customers that are more DevOps focused development teams and then infrastructure focused operation teams? Is that a fair way to say?
I'm not sure. I think because, we are doing only Kubernetes, like this is our focus, this is our claim to fame, and that's it. So even at the start, we were quite, focused on cloud native companies or companies that have a lot of workloads in the cloud, which are traditionally back then, like 2 years ago, it was more like the early adopters, right? The elite teams and so on, and not necessarily like the companies where there is like a very big separation. I will say that the biggest change that we are seeing is even in those companies, it's like the operation are doing a lot of things. There is deployment, there is like secret management, there is like so many different things which are like ops or like DevOps. And I think that like the day two operation, especially in Kubernetes, is like the last thing that is moving towards the developer, because it's the last thing in the list, right? Like first you need to bundle the code and then to test it and then to do a lot of other things. And only then it's in production. And only then there are problems, and only then you need to solve them. So I think it's, as an industry, it's not just us. I think like everyone is seeing it, even like a very cloud native companies. By the way, I think that tools such as Backstage and like platform engineers in general and platforms and so on, it's a very big buzz. I'm not sure like when are people going to see this video. Maybe in a year it won't be the talk of the day, but I think those tools are gaining a lot of popularity, like a lot of usage basically, and it comes from the same reason. It comes with the same basically reasons or like agenda of how can we make the dev much more efficient. We reach to a state where we must bring them the appropriate tools. I think Commodore is the it's the tools that is the real tool that they need, but it's part of a bigger trend. Like I think that
Right.
if I would say to you everything I'm saying now, like 2 years ago, I think almost no one would have listened to me, basically, because we are still talking with companies, right? And they're telling us who can trust developers, like the operation people. I don't want them to troubleshoot something like, they are stupid, like they don't know how to do things. Like there was like one guy who said like, they're the last person in the company I trust on understanding production issues or something like that. And I think back then it was like the
That's
mentality
changing.
in general. It is shifting, but it's like gradual shift. It's not like, yeah, I support my developers or I don't support my developers. Like a lot of the times it's a question of giving them the appropriate tools to succeed. Like you can't just tell them, yeah, how hard it is. You just open Splunk and New Relic and Argo and like kubectl, and you understand like what's the issue. And I'm like, yeah, it's like 4 different tools that require expertise, require to understand what is happening, require deep Kubernetes knowledge. Like Commodore, by the way, don't come to replace those tools other than like the kubectl. Like we are replacing everything you need to do when it comes to interacting with the cluster. But we simplify everything for you. Like we take a very, very like busy and like expert word, and we simplify it. And when it comes to the product, like how did we change the product? We are trying to take screens that looks very complex or are really, really complex, and we try to remove everything which is not necessarily for the developer. Like we try to ask ourselves, I'm a developer, what I really care about, and I don't really care about the internal events of Kubernetes during that time or like things like that might really interest the SRE. He just wants to know like, should I handle this issue? Is it an application problem? Is it an infra problem? If it's an application problem, do you mind showing me the logs as soon as possible? And if it's an infra problem, let's just escalate it as soon as possible.
So the product changes that you're talking about that make it more dev focused are more to simplify and streamline the displays to show only the information that the developer needs. But how do you know what that is? And how do you know, I mean, where do you draw the line as far as developers don't need to know about this? Developers do need to know about this. And is it the same from customer to customer, or is that changes based on the maturity levels of the organization?
Yeah. It's like, developer is like, everyone is like a developer. Like there are different level of experience between companies, inside the same company, inside the same team, right? Like there are different level of experience. We're trying to answer like the first thing that you will see when you have an issue in Commodore, we should provide meaningful value to around 90% of the people who are going to look at this screen. Like our goal is like obviously like 100%. Sometimes we missed, like we gave too much information or we missed something. But I think that the canonical questions of like solving an issue are quite similar, both for like expert and non-experts. Like the expert can answer those questions much faster, but like, what's the current status? Like, how many replicas do I have? Like, if I have 0, it's very bad. If I have 9 out of 10, okay, maybe it's fine, right? Like, so what's the current status? How long do I experience the problem that I'm currently experiencing? Like, is it just started or is it something old? How frequent is this issue? Is it something that always happen, or like it started now for the first time after like a couple of weeks? Was there a recent change in the system? Did there was a deployment, a config change, a vault change, like anything else? Is there any other alerts ongoing in the system at the moment that might explain this? Is there a Kubernetes infra problem like node problem or pressure that might explain the issue? So, I asked like a couple of questions here. I hope it wasn't like too much or too fast. But I think both the expert and the non-expert care about these kind of questions, the triage phase. An expert can answer those in like, 1 minute, I don't know, maybe even less, like 5 seconds. And a developer might never know how to answer those questions. So we try to take the most important questions and to put it in their face. Like, a lot of the times, even inside Commodore, right? Like, I see a graph and I tell them, we have a problem. Like, this is not how a graph should look like. And that's it. Like, I don't need anything else, give me a memory graph, or I don't know, like we just had a problem with how many requests per second. And I told them, like, this graph doesn't make sense. Someone is lying, or maybe we're sending the wrong metrics, or maybe the system is not behaving how it should behave. But this is like not, I saw a lot of like sending that graph. This is not good. And, I'm telling that because I know, like, I'm quite good in what I do, right? As a developer, a CTO, architecture, like I've been there and I know that. And for me, looking at this graph, it just doesn't make sense. Like, it doesn't tell the complete story. Someone else might look at this graph and say, I don't know, it's a graph, it's a nice graph, but is there a problem? Like, how should I know? So Commodore tried to take this knowledge that exists only for like expert Kubernetes like people and to dumb it down basically for them, like telling them, hey, you are missing a secret. Like, if you create a secret with this key, your application will be good. If not, it's not going to load. Like, there is no middle ground here. Like, you are missing a very key part. The PVC is not loading. Why it is not loading? You misconfigure it, you misdid something, there are a lot of different failure scenarios. But the gist of it is something that we believe we can really like simplify, and we see it, like we already see the first reaction from customers and happy customers.
So let's go through a specific example. And I want to focus specifically on the types of information that a traditional ops person would want to see in Commodore, and the types of information that traditional dev would want to see in Commodore. So let's take a problem like nodes are constantly failing. The failure rate of nodes is 10%. 10% nodes fail every hour. So some astronomically high number. Something obviously is going wrong in the system that's causing that to happen. Now, in order to diagnose that problem could be something in the infrastructure. It could be resource allocation issues, not enough, the cluster's overloaded. It could be something like that, or it could be a code-related issue where services are starting up, they run for a period of time, they have a memory leak, they get shut off because memory is being used up, and then the node goes down. Whatever. It could be a couple of different reasons. In one case, that's more of a ops-focused thing, the Kubernetes cluster issues. The other one is very much a developer-focused thing, a problem in the code that's running within the node. How do you give information that's available to both of them to help diagnose what that problem is? And so they can determine on their own, yes, this is my problem, or no, this is not my problem. And the other team gets the opposite answer, right? How do you do that?
Yeah, great question and great example. So nodes, for example, is something common. Like a lot of customers complain the nodes are not going up, they're not spawning. Like people are always having problems. Nodes,
common Kubernetes problem.
network, it is quite common. So from a dev perspective, usually like 90% of the time, right? Like 95% of the time, if I can simply tell him, hey, the cluster is having nodes issue, he's happy because he doesn't need to handle it. Like in most cases, he's going to escalate it for the developers. But usually,
but it could be a code startup problem.
No, it can. But for the dev, like currently, only doing the triaging of understanding, like why did the dev came to Commodore, right? Like he's not bored. Like he came to Commodore because now he has a problem with his application. The SLO is breached. There was a PagerDuty alert. Someone complained that the system is not working. So the developer now starts doing the diagnostic, the triaging phase. And without Commodore, he's like, reading the logs, going to Sentry, maybe like doing a lot of different things, not understanding what's the problem. If I can tell him, hey, your nodes are having issues, in 95% of the time, it means, first of all, let's escalate it for the DevOps. Maybe now we need to work like side by side, like both developers and an operation person like working together. But in most companies, when they hear there's a node problem, the developer is not responsible on solving those issues. I'm telling you right now, we can argue he should be responsible for that. But, by the way, in a conversation like yesterday that I just mentioned, he said, developers don't understand sometimes that it's like a node problem, and they are like spending hours diagnosing something that they simply can't solve. And he blamed GKE, by the way. And he said, yeah, and GKE have a lot of like node problems. For the DevOps that came to Commodore, now come the DevOps, and he heard that there are like node problems, but why? We give him, first of all, like a full timeline of everything that happened in the cluster from the node point of view. All of the nodes that existed, why they died, what were their status, their error code, the logs, if there were any. So we bring all of this data in, we have a screen called node, and we have node issue detector, so they can go there to understand and to find the issue. But when I look at the breakdown of who used Commodore for what like scenarios, you see that the people who click on the node tab in Commodore when it comes to, dev versus DevOps, it's like 95% people who are like ops people, 5% which are like developers. It's like they don't really care. They don't care on one hand, but on the other hand, this caused them a lot of pain. Because when they get the page that their application is not working, they don't know that it's not their fault. And a lot of the times what happened is, it was like one time it was a node issue, second time it was a node issue. The third time that he gets the page, the first thing that he's doing, the developer, is to escalate it to the DevOps, like without checking for anything. Because it's much easier, like you write things like, hey, can you help me? And, we try to like give him the tool to determine like what's the status. Is it an infra? Is it not an infra? Are other pods in the same node also experiencing like the same symptoms? Are they also crashing? If so, again, it's like something bigger than like one single developer. If all of the node is crashing all of the time, it might be that one developer they have done a change that caused all of this, or a huge spike in traffic or things like that. There are countless of like failure scenarios, but we help them like doing the triage and to try and find out like the real root cause of it very, very fast. And again, like fast and streamlined, you said it yourself. So yeah.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit more about the actual mechanics of this now. So this DevFirst focus, you've also changed the model for how you sell your product, right? Yeah. You've moved to a freemium model. You're moving to a PLG sort of strategy. Can you talk a little bit about that and why that changed?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we are moving. Like now we have a freemium offering. It's in the market for only a couple of weeks. Like already like thousands of users. So it is kicking off quite nicely. And the reason for that is, again, like everything we do is like, we hear what people are asking us. And we have customers who are now paying customers telling us like, why didn't you have like a freemium product? I would have tried that like ages ago, but I simply couldn't. And because now we're targeting not only the per ops guy or girl, but also the developers are much more used to freemium products compared to sometimes operation people. I've been in operations, sometimes book a demo is like the only way. Like it sucks, but that's life. Like Commodore also had like 14 days free trial even prior to that. But we are adding a lot of capabilities in the product that we want them to serve the mass, basically. Like we did changes in the product that allows us to be the best Kubernetes dashboard in the market, to operate, to manage. Like you can do everything you can do with kubectl, but much easier with Commodore and much simpler with Commodore. And we felt that in order to really gain first of all, to give the users something that will be valuable for them, and for us to grow much faster as a business, that's like the best solution there is. We also released like an open source as well. Like we took a chunk of the product, we simply open sourced it. It is called the Helm dashboard. It's in the market for 3 months, I think, like ever since KubeCon, basically October, or I think so.
Yeah, 3.5 months.
Yeah, 3.5 months, which also gained like a huge amount of popularity. Like Helm dashboard is like 3K stars project, 100 plus like daily users. Like it is like much better than expected when it comes to and I'm happy. Like we have like almost 20 contributors already. Like a lot of like I saw open source project. I was quite surprised by the success of it. And Helm dashboard in its core is nothing too fancy. It's to take something like Helm, which is used daily by developers and operation people, and to give them the proper UI to simplify it. I used Helm for 6 years, 7 years, I don't know, like a lot of time ever since, like I think before Helm 1.0. And I love Helm. I think it's like it changed the Kubernetes ecosystem. It did a lot of like amazing things, Helm together with CRD. But it's not that easy. And I really love the Helm project, but it's not that easy. And we gave like people who use Helm a very simple or like easier way of working with Helm instead of the CLI. And this in turn really helped them, enjoy life more. Like we see a lot of people like telling us, this really changed how I operate with Helm, and this is exactly the reason we took this part of the product and when we moved to open source. But it's really fun to hear, and it is like really, again, like you see that there are so many moving pieces when it comes to Kubernetes. There are so many gotchas, so many like small things that you need to understand. When we first like published the product, and I sat down like with the marketing team in Commodore, right? And we really had like a really good PR. Like a lot of people shared it and so on. And in the beginning, they told me like, Itiel, like like Helm looks like quite successful. Are you sure that it needs a UI? Like there's a CLI. Developers and ops people love like CLI. Like why would we?
They like dashboards though too. So
and and when you see it, once we built like the first mockup, you're like, wow, like I can't believe I worked without that. And I think that we're sometimes as like developers, as operation people, we're used to working quite hard, like doing like 5 grep. To me, it looks like it makes the total sense to get the data I need, grep, awk, doing it into a file using IPython. And, for me, sometimes it takes only like, like 1 minute or something like that, and it works. But for people who are not expert, having those tools is like life changers. Like we are taking them from a state where they had no idea what is happening to a state where they can operate it and to own it and to feel accountable for that, without them needing to be like a bash experts or like to install a lot of plugins and so on. So
So the non-Kubernetes experts, such as the development group, this is a perfect model for them because it gives them access to the information they need about how Kubernetes is operating and all the things that Helm provides without having to learn the API, without having to learn the command line, I should say.
Even like
I know developers hate CubeControl. They hate
yeah.
CubeControl. They hate dealing with
it. And
that.
I will say CubeControl is like 10x better than Helm CLI, I think. Like when it comes to use again and again, I'm really like a lens, like I really like the project. But even like trivial things, like sometimes it doesn't show you like pending Helm status or something like that when you do like Helm LS, like we don't show that. You need to ask for this explicitly or something like that, like small things that I'm like, but why? Like it's like super valuable information. Why are you hiding this information from me? And we are getting a lot of issues, by the way, like good issues, like add this functionality. And every time, even we are like surprised on the gotchas that happens. Like for now, like as an example, we just got an issue that Helm dashboard doesn't support neatly cluster with more than 300 Helm charts installed. And I was surprised, like I didn't knew it's like a common issue, and we get like, support this, yeah, it's like we must have it. And you see how many like different failure scenarios or like good scenarios exist inside our ecosystem. So Commodore in general, when you think about Kubernetes, like you should first of all like try Commodore, so you will gain this level of like ownership, autonomy, and even like having fun, right? Like I love Kubernetes, like enjoying a bit the work, not only living in fear. So,
yeah. Well, we're actually at time here now. This time went by really, really, really fast. It's been great talking to you. Is there anything else you want to mention about your new focus that you haven't talked about that you think is important for our listeners or watchers?
Not really. The only thing that I have to say is that we have a lot of like surprise in store. Like you can follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn. But we are planning a couple of integration with like very like common tools in the ecosystem. I mentioned Backstage, Argo CD. Like our goal is to be like a very integrated part with the community, and we are also working on like something still in like early beta, but a desktop app for Commodore. So really like feel free like to follow us, follow Udi, which is like our DevRel, to any cool updates or memes about Kubernetes. Like it's worth it. Udi Hofesh.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Great. So if people want to learn more about Commodore, where do they go?
Commodore.com, Commodore Twitter, or to follow me or Udi on social.
Commodore is Komodor.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So my guest today has been Itiel Shwartz, who's the CTO and co-founder of Commodore. And Itiel, it's great as always talking to you, and looking forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, Lee. Bye-bye.